everybody. Galen Clavio here. Happy to be joining you folks as we get ready for the 2022 edition of the World Cup in the only way that we know how, through audio and video, a podcast as we talk through not just today, not just next week when the World Cup starts, but the entire tournament. That's the goal for us, at least. This is Pod of the Century, the IU version of the 2022 Qatar World Cup evaluation process as we take a look at the games coming up, the games that will be happening throughout the course of the first couple of weeks and then beyond as we get into the knockout stage. Looking forward to chatting with you all throughout. If you've got comments or questions, be sure to hit us up. You can hit me up at Dr. GC on Twitter. I'll let my fine co-hosts talk about how to get a hold of them, as we'd love to hear from you throughout the course of the tournament. But let me go ahead and bring my co-hosts in to start off with. I'm going to start with Jack Edwards. Jack is currently the director of the Hoosier Network and has done a lot of work with soccer reporting here at Indiana University over the course of the last several years. Jack, a big fan of the beautiful game. Jack, it's good to see you. Not in full game shape today. You're a little under the weather, but I appreciate you joining us nonetheless.
I'm glad to be here, Galen. Now, you'll hear it in my voice. It's a bit more, battered. I'm going through a bit of as we got a bit of snow yesterday, which kind of threw me through a loop. My body decided to kind of just join the seasons and just change and just kind of mess me up a little bit. But I'm really excited, Galen. You mentioned it. Big fan of the beautiful game. And this is a weird time because it's like the middle of college athletics season for us at Indiana University. And now we've got probably the premier World Football Tournament starting in about a week. It's kind of been weird having the Premier League wrap up these last few matches where it's like, all right, now we're looking forward to the World Cup, but I'm excited to be here, Galen. It's
great to have you. And yeah, no, it's really exciting. I'm looking forward to chatting with you about it and all the rest of the folks that we're going to have on. And one of those folks that we're going to have on regularly, a new addition to our podcast roster, Daniel Eves, joining us. Daniel, welcome to podcasting here at IU, and welcome to this show in particular. How are you doing?
I'm great. And thank you very much for having me on. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you, Galen, and you, Jack. As you pointed out, Jack, it's a very exciting time. Obviously, a little bit peculiar with a World Cup happening in November and December, and something I probably wasn't prepared for, but my first World Cup tournament in this country. And I'm excited for the next few months. I think it's going to be very fun.
Yeah, it should be a great time. And, this is a kind of a fascinating and a little bit troubling World Cup from a variety of perspectives. We're going to be talking about that throughout. A lot to keep an eye on, not just in terms of what's going to go on the pitch, but also some of the issues that are potentially going to be taking place off the pitch. A lot of talk about that so far. And, we've seen articles and podcasts and news stories about teams trying to make political statements, FIFA trying to shove that back under the rug as they are wont to do, and just a general weird atmosphere going into this tournament that I think is certainly going to be peculiar, certainly more so, I think, than Russia was. Russia, you did have a situation, obviously, where there was corruption, there were questionable, a variety of questionable things that went into that, but Russia, as a European country, I think to some degree, got away without a whole lot of overt political commentary about the fact that they were hosting. Now, if they were hosting this year, I think it'd be a different story altogether. But Qatar, a different thing altogether, as Qatar it's not a soccer nation. They've performed fairly well, but it's a small country. They had to build basically all of the stadiums that are being used in this World Cup, much of that using migrant labor under very questionable conditions. And it's really caused a crisis of conscience among a lot of folks in and around the game. And yet here we are. And, we're on the eve of the tournament. And generally speaking, for better or for worse, what I have found over the course of time is that these things tend to fall away as discussion points as the games actually start. I guess what I'm curious from you guys about is, do you see that happening here? Or do you see the political and kind of moral questions being front and center? Or do you see those starting to fade away as we start to get 3 and 4 games a day? Jack, go ahead if you want to start.
Yeah, I mean, you think back to kind of when Premier League and European football came back from lockdown. You had the kneeling before kickoffs. It wore on. I think the more that progressed, and they got to kind of a point where has this message kind of worn out? Have people kind of gotten, all right, they're taking a knee now, but what does that really signify? Like we get it already, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So there's always that perspective to things. But for me, I think we'll probably be hit with stuff really early on, those first few matches, especially with that very first one. And I'm fascinated to see if players demonstrate. That'll be, I think, the big signifier is I think Qatar will do a good job suppressing any other discussion points if it's not happening on the pitch. So if players are taking knees, if a player pulls their shirt over their head and they got a message on their chest, like however many migrant workers died, that's when I could see it really prevailing. If a player on the pitch who's not being forced is the wrong word, but if they want to compete in the World Cup, they have to do it here. There's no other option for them. So for them to use that platform to then protest, I imagine that's probably the most prevailing and long form version of that. Not including that, though, you have the people saying they're not going to watch from home and they're not going to travel and all those things. That will be the waves will be much smaller there than they will be if you have, even if it's big players. You think about, I would never see it from a player like Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo, where they're just a brand, to be honest, a human. They would not probably be the players leading that movement. But if it's someone of major note, I would think someone from the England national team, potentially from that, like a Marcus Rashford, I think would be a guy who I think I could really see doing something if he scores an early goal for England.
Yeah, Daniel, one of the things that's interesting is, in the wake of George Floyd and everything, you saw players kneeling here in the U.S., but you've also seen it in the Premier League, and this has become essentially a part of every Premier League game where you'll see players take a knee at the start of things. And that's just kind of become accepted. Like the Premier League said, we're fine with this level of demonstration. I don't think FIFA or Qatar will be fine with that level of demonstration. So I'm curious to get your sense of how you think this might play out, if it plays out at all.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. There's absolutely no way FIFA and Qatar will be on the same page as the Premier League and the FA were when it came to the Black Lives Matter movement. Kind of over the lockdown, when there were no fans in the stadiums in the UK, was when that really got going, and the players were kneeling, and then gradually fans were allowed back in, and the players were still kneeling, and the message was still heard. I would say it's certainly fading, the message. It's not being talked about as much in the footballing landscape, mainly because we're now talking about some of the catastrophes surrounding this World Cup. And I think you bring up a good point, Jack. Rashford, a young player who we've seen in the past make huge statements towards the UK media, who are known as being ruthless towards some players. And he has had some pretty good PR schemes from, if you're looking at it from the fan perspective. And if there was one person to do it, I could certainly see it being him. I think the German national teams want to look at. They are usually very right on and kind of forward thinking with those approaches, and aren't really too scared to voice their opinion, as they are such a strong power. It's not like anyone can knock Germany out for anything for making a statement. So I think Germany can make a statement. Obviously, we've seen Denmark. That's the big ones. They're going to the World Cup with blank shirts as a statement towards the migrant workers who have tragically passed. So, I think it's going to be a massive talking point.
It's going to really be fascinating. And I think Denmark's the country, and there's several other countries where I feel like the feeling like something has to be said on an international stage to draw attention is going to be irresistible. And that's going to be really fascinating to watch throughout the course of, I think, the first few games. Now, I think as you get further into the tournament, there's going to have to be some balances played out behind the scenes. And I think that as much as Qatar wants to squelch the level of public attention or opposition, chances are FIFA is going to be like, look, if there are incidents, you just need to let them go. Don't try to be punitive, because ultimately that'll only draw more attention, and that's going to take away from the rest of the tournament. So we've seen FIFA try to come out and say, we need to concentrate on the football, as they always do. And I'm sure by the end of the first week, that's probably where all the attention is likely to be. But I am really fascinated, especially for that, not the first match between Qatar and Ecuador, but the second day's worth of matches, because I think that there's a real possibility, as the world is watching a little more closely in those three matches, that you'll see some kind of a statement get made.
And just kind of follow up on that, it's the Group B action, in there as well. So you have England, the United States, which, especially here in America, will be very prevalent because it's America following the American national team, but it's also English-speaking teams, where that will probably prevail like among Western media a lot more than Ecuador versus Qatar, where that match will definitely, it'll be the opener, but that kind of discussion point won't be. Then you made a good point, Galen. I would be fascinated to see a response from FIFA. I think if it's, let's use Rashford as an example, in that match against Iran on that very first day at 8 a.m., how do they respond? Like that, I think is just a big test of how they may decide to move at things going through the rest of the tournament.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep an eye on it. And if you've got comments or thoughts or questions on this or anything else, and you're watching us live on YouTube, leave a comment on the YouTube channel, and we will talk about it, as long as it's something that we can talk about in a broadcast setting. So feel free to do that as you folks are listening in, or if you're hearing this after the fact or any of our podcasts, go ahead and you can send us in tweets at IU Sports Media, at Dr. GC, and then you can hit up my friends as well here. So anyway, with all that said, let's go ahead and start talking about the games. Let's first start by taking a look at what is going on in the groups overall. For those who, I'm sure most of you who are tuning in are probably aware, but 8 groups, 32 teams total. And as you look through these different groups, Jack, let me start with you on this. Is there a particular group? Let's take Group B out of the way for all of us, because I think we're all interested in that, at least on this podcast, just because England and the United States are playing in it. But outside of that, is there a group that draws the most attention to you and the one you're most excited to see the group stage games from?
I would probably say Group E for me personally, because you think about, the top teams, how many big hitters are in the same group. I would say in Group E, with Spain, Germany, Costa Rica, and Japan, you've got Spain and Germany, who are two of the most historic heavy hitters of the last, 3 World Cups. They've won 2 of them. Spain in 10 and Germany in 14. So I think that one is really interesting for me, because that's going to provide the most potential for a big dog to go out early, just because of how much is in that group. I think you'd anticipate the top 2 to advance out of that one, but it's also going to be your probably first huge juggernaut one-on-one matchup between Spain and Germany. You think about, top international teams in the world, those are the 2 of the first teams you maybe think about. So that for me provides a great group stage matchup. And I think that's just going to be the most possibility for someone to go out very early. You think about back to Germany in 18, getting knocked out in the group stage.
And Spain, Germany, that is the 2 p.m. game on Sunday, the 27th. So 2 weeks from today, that'll be essentially the primetime game in Europe, and it'll be the mid-afternoon game here in the United States. Daniel, from your perspective, let's take that group off the table just so we're not being boring. Is there another group well, first of all, what is your first choice group? And if it isn't that one, then let us know.
In the sense of what is the group of death, I'm also following Jack there, and it has to be Group E if we're taking away Group B. Group B, obviously, you got Spain and Germany, as you said, the heavy hitters, and Costa Rica and Japan. Neither of those teams are walkover teams, and they will both give up very tough challenges. But the group that I'm really quite interested to watch is actually Group G. And I don't think it's been getting talked about much, but you've obviously got Brazil, probably the favorite, most people, to win the whole tournament. And then you've got Serbia, Switzerland, and Cameroon. And I really don't think there's that much which separates those 3. And I think that's going to make it really interesting for that second spot. If we rule out Brazil, I think most people would agree that they will probably win that group with a fair amount of ease. But you've got Serbia and Switzerland, who I think are going to be relatively similar. You've got Serbia, who have Mitrovic up top. plays for Fulham, is a very competitive player, very feisty. But they've also got Vlahovic, who plays for Juventus, who played fantastically for Fiorentina for a couple of years and then got the big move to the Italian Giants and hasn't quite shone. But I think he might see this as an opportunity to kind of get that limelight back. But him and Mitrovic, and then Cameroon, an African nation, we see it time and time again. African nations get overlooked in these tournaments, and they deserve so much more respect for their footballing talents. They may not have the big names, unless you're maybe talking about Sadio Mane with Senegal, but Cameroon will put up a fight. So that second spot in Group G is going to be really interesting, I think.
And it sounds like Mane, he's at least going to be on the roster. He hasn't been ruled out of the World Cup. There have been several players ruled out due to injury, and it maybe is questionable whether he'll be able to make much of a contribution just because of the injuries, but he's at least available for them and might be able. We've seen weirder things over the course of the history of the World Cup where players that you would have guessed would have not been able to play at all have been able to come in and make contributions.
I mean, yeah, for Senegal, you know, the gap between Sadio Mane, like this spot that you could give him by just filling him in with another player, that player does not move the needle nearly as much as a 25% Sadio Mane if you're able to just get something out of him, because you know that he's going to, and I think Bayern Munich will be very warily watching this, where they're saying, what are you doing with one of our star players, our big acquisition from this summer? He's going to be trying to rehab, trying to get himself fit and ready to try and make an appearance. And I think that would be a storyline to definitely watch out for. Just Mane coming off the bench, final 15 minutes, if they need a goal, last group stage match. I mean, I love him personally as a player. That would be something that I'm looking forward to. And I'm glad that the door is not fully closed, because that was a very devastating one when he went down with that injury in a nothing match against, I think it was like Werder Bremen, but they won like 6-1. So it really kind of was, again, doubles back to the timing of this World Cup. It's a week between, United just played Fulham earlier today, and their players got to get on their planes and travel to Qatar, because in a week they're going to be competing in matches. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, I think both of those are really fascinating groups. So I'm looking for another group that I'm interested in. I got to say, the one I think a lot of people will pick is Group H. I'm not picking that because I think that one's actually fairly clear cut. Because even though there's some really cool brand names, Ghana this year is not the Ghana that we've seen in past World Cups. Uruguay is at the very tail end of that generation of players. And South Korea, we don't even know if their best player is going to be 100%, as of course, Heung-min Son suffered the broken eye socket that had to get surgery here recently. He was at the game for Spurs against Leeds this weekend, which was nice to see in street clothes. The other group I'm really interested in, though, is Group D for completely different reasons. I think that Group E and Group G have some really competitive games, and we feel pretty good about knowing what each of those teams bring to the table. I have no clue what any of the teams in Group D are going to be doing. You've got France, who is the poster child for underperformance after winning a World Cup. And this is something we've seen pretty consistently. I mean, you think about, Italy wins in 2006 and then crashes out in the group stage in 10. Spain wins in 10 and crashes out, in pretty dramatic fashion in 14. Germany wins in 14 and crashes out in the group stage in 18. France wins in 18, and they look like a mess. Like, they look like a mess at the same level that they looked like a mess in 2010. So how that now, it's weird though, because France might be the most talented team in the tournament. It's, I think, probably either them or Brazil or Argentina, depending on who you want to give a preference to. England, I think, is also in there as well, Daniel. But France does have a tendency to devolve a bit. They had a really bad lead-in to this World Cup, and I'm fascinated to see how they perform at a time when I'm guessing most of their players don't want to be there in the first place. And then you go down the rest of the list. Denmark is a dark horse to win the entire tournament. That is a really well-oiled machine. They might have the most, the best possession-based midfield in the tournament right now between Eriksen and Højbjerg. They've got other really good pieces. They overperformed in the Euros in 2021, and they look primed to do something that country has not done in a while. Tunisia and Australia are not great teams, but those are teams that have a real chance at grinding out results and throwing a monkey wrench in and only allowing a Denmark or a France to get a 1 point out of a tie as opposed to getting all three. So I think that might be the most entertaining group in terms of just complete off the screen kind of results. So we'll have to see. I think there's some interesting possibilities throughout the entirety of these tournaments or these group stage games. I am interested, how everybody looks coming into this, because Jack, as you pointed out, it's such a jarring change. And now we're hearing about, teams trying to squeeze friendlies in. I guess the U.S. is going to be playing a friendly this Thursday, although we're not sure against who. Canada, I think, just played a friendly because none of their players have been playing in any of the domestic leagues. So there's all different levels of competition, readiness, and very little team cohesion out of any of these squads. It could be a really wild group stage just in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see once again that national teams and club teams, the relationship between them is really splitting. And it used to be there was a tough relationship for a long time. English clubs, namely Man United, wouldn't send their players to the national team. They would have very convenient injuries going into international friendlies. And now you've got certainly not friendlies. This is the most premier tournament in world sport. You're not pulling a tactical injury here. And a lot of these players probably have more allegiance to their national team than their club team, even though they're getting paid hundreds of thousands a week by their club team. So I think that is interesting. Squeezing a friendly in is a huge risk to any national team because the players right now are so scared to get injured. The Premier League this weekend, watching some players was like watching a dads versus lads game where the dads wouldn't tackle the players. Man City played Brentford and half the players just clearly did not want to be there, did not want to get touched, too scared to go into tackles. And fair enough, you're seeing Heung-min Son go down, Sadio Mane go down. You don't want to miss this tournament, and you just never know if you're going to make the next World Cup with it being 4 years away. So,
yeah, I 100% agree. Like, I think this tournament is the most wide open for an upset out of any tournament we'll probably have, unless they decide to maybe make a winter, like a spring one in the future. I don't know what country would initiate that kind of change.
Don't give them ideas, Jack. What are you doing?
Like, I don't think like a March Madness combo with the World Cup wouldn't be an absolutely insane month. I mean, that'd be kind of crazy. Like you got 5 a.m. your first match, and then you got end of the day with like a Sweet 16 game in March Madness. That would be.
Yeah. I would love it, but I think I'm like about the 0.1% of the world that follows both. Like, Daniel, how many people watch college basketball in England? I'm guessing it's not a high number.
I could maybe count on my hands. You've got some NBA fans, but college basketball has not made it across. TV rights haven't made it there yet.
But yeah, just I think
the next big thing to break in the EU. Anyway, sorry, go on, Jack. Go ahead.
100%. It's fascinating to me just to see how who steps up to this open tournament almost. I think it's, Brazil and Argentina are the two teams that I immediately look to and say, all right, on paper, you have the most, I think, built up prestige. They've not been battered by injuries, and they've got their headliners, obviously, in Lionel Messi and Neymar. But really, I think Denmark is a really interesting one, Galen, because semifinals in 2021 in the Euro 2020, it's a team that really could take advantage of an open spot. But I think this is going to be, almost like maybe like a 2002, when South Korea made it all the way to the semifinals. You can look back on that and you say that's kind of an odd team to make it that far historically. This, I think we could see a few of those, like where it's just, especially from Group A, because Group A is going to send through, I think, a team that shouldn't be there, but you got the Netherlands and Senegal, but Senegal may be missing Sadio Mane. So maybe you're looking at Ecuador or Qatar as a team to get into the knockout stage of the World Cup. It's really going to be fascinating just because I think we're going to have 3 to 4 of the big hitters going down very, very early just because of how weirdly timed this World Cup is.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not just the timing. It's also historically when you have World Cups that take place outside of Europe and South America, weird stuff happens. I mean, you go back, it wasn't just South Korea making it to the semifinals in 2002. It was also Turkey making it to the semifinals, which seems insane to think about, given that Turkey has essentially disappeared from the world stage in football over the course of the last 15 years or so. You go back to the U.S. World Cup in 1994, you end up with Bulgaria making a run to the semifinals and Sweden making a run to the semifinals. And I don't think anybody projected that going into that tournament. So you do see some crazy stuff happen when you get it out of the normal realm. Even South Africa in 2010, watching Uruguay kind of work their way through methodically, it was impressive to see. I don't know if that happens under normal circumstances. And so this one's weird for a bunch of reasons, and I agree with you, Jack. I think there's just a real possibility that some of the big teams, it's not that they won't take it seriously, but there's a pattern generally to any big tournament, and those patterns tend to be the season ends, we get a little bit of time off, then we go and play in this big tournament, and the qualifications are all synced up, the friendlies are all synced up, like everything is like building towards this, and none of that exists here. So to some degree, I think it almost eliminates some of the talent disparity that you find with a France or a Germany or even an Argentina or a Brazil, because to some degree, it's like the teams that have less talent that are more system-based, and this is where I think the Japans and the Denmarks and some of those teams, Switzerland, this is where this comes in handy for them, because they probably have a little bit of a stronger sense of identity with the national team than maybe some of these really big squads do. Now, it's hard to say, and I don't think we're going to know until the games actually start. And that's the other issue with this, Daniel, is that it's almost impossible to predict who's going to hit the ground running and who's going to look like they're completely lost. Because even in 2018, everybody's picking Germany to the semifinals or further. And it became clear very quickly, like, this German team does not quite have it. I think we're going to have a lot of those moments the first few days where it's like, wow, that the team that, we thought was going to be together really isn't at all.
Yeah, I think we may see kind of something which goes along the lines of which leagues in Europe are actually the most tiring, in a sense that you may see the Premier League players who fill teams like England. You're going to see an England 11, which is probably going to be 11 Premier League players. There's a good chance that they're going to be very fatigued. They've got the FA Cup, the League Cup. They've got multiple competitions, Champions League, Europa League, or whatever that they've got to deal with. We may see a team like Spain, who have pretty much all their players playing La Liga, look quite energized, because the La Liga is simply just not as challenging from top to bottom. And those teams that those players play on don't have such a packed schedule that the likes of Man City or Liverpool or Man United have. Those players have been playing 3 games a week for the last few months. The Spanish teams have maybe been playing 2 games a week. And I think we may see that catch up to a few of the players of probably the England team, especially coming out of the group stage. 3 games in 9 days is not easy for any professional footballer. And when you combine it with the fact that they've been playing 3 games every week for the last few months, I think that's going to be something to keep an eye on.
This is where the NBA with load management, everybody criticizes them, but this is why you do it. I mean, and you can talk about what matters and what's important. And this is the big tension, as you were mentioning earlier, with club football versus international football. Like, at the end of the day, the bulk of the salaries are being paid by the club teams. That's where they're making their day jobs. And, what's more important to you and what's more important to your club team, it's going to make for some interesting times as these players try to navigate all of this. An update on injuries that we know of so far that have officially ruled people out. A few injuries that happened in the last week or two. Yvonne Muvogo, the Swiss player, was injured in Ligue 1. So he is out for the rest of the tournament. We saw Ben Chilwell go down with a hamstring injury, and he ended up not getting named. He's out. Timo Werner is out, and that's a not inconsequential loss for Germany. Diogo Jota out due to a calf injury, and so he's out for Portugal. Some other names that popped up in the last month or so: Reece James for England, Pedro Neto for Portugal, obviously Chris Richards out for the USA, and N'Golo Kante out for France. And then Giorgio Wijnaldum, not to forget him, also out for the Netherlands. I mean, that's a pretty decent chunk of talent right off the bat there that isn't going to be playing. And that's the ones that we know of. I mean, I think there's probably some injuries to players, and this is where the Mane injury comes in, where we really don't know the full extent of it. And even if they are technically able to go and on the roster, they're probably in a position where they're not going to be able to contribute, which kind of makes, again, it goes back to this idea of, where does the talent versus depth or system versus talent argument come in? It is going to be fascinating to watch all that play out, Jack.
100%. And I think it's also, for me, the biggest question is, do we see upsets or do we just see a reduction in the quality of the sport in front of us? And I'm unfortunately leaning more towards, I think we might just going to see some bad games, because it's not even, I would be fascinated to see the amount of long-term injuries for players, eliminating them from the tournament for this tournament compared to tournaments past. Like, is this a higher rate because we've had so many big names? The bigger thing will just be, as Daniel mentioned, just raw fatigue. I mean, you're going from a week off, which is just a standard, Sunday to Sunday. Maybe you have once or twice a season for a team like a Liverpool or Manchester City, where you just have 7 days where you don't have a match. You have that break before the World Cup. That's just so unorthodox. That's not even enough time to get normal fitness built back up to a regular season. So it's gonna, I think, lead to, you think about those first few knockout matches, teams are going to look bad. They're just going to look really, really tired and out of it. I think that it is going to be a mixture of players that have been able to almost be kind of on the peripheral looking in. We're leaning towards England a lot because that's the league I follow the most. A guy like Calvin Phillips being called up to that team is fascinating because he doesn't play much for City. And that's a very common disrespect to why he shouldn't have been called up. But almost the inverse argument, he hasn't played that much. He's going to be very fresh in terms of just the amount of wear under his legs. Maybe match fitness is a bit off of there, but he's played well for England. He'll come in. He'll do very well in that department. So I think there's going to be players who can kind of come in, having not had major club obligations, may be able to carry a lot of water for your superstars, your guys who have played a lot, where they're being relied on a lot by their clubs. So it really is a weird one where, I don't know what to expect, Galen. I'm sure those first few matches are going to illuminate a lot to us what we should expect. I'm hopeful it swings more towards the smaller nations and more upsets can happen because they're allowed to have a better fitness. If we get that rather than just a low standard of play, I'm going to be very happy.
Yeah, I mean, the one really fascinating thing I think also tactically is that so much of what we've seen in club soccer has trended towards closer to three at the back. A lot of wide play. We've kind of swung all the way the opposite direction from the very heavily possession play stuff. A lot of pressing. A lot of stuff happening way up the pitch, and between the fatigue, Daniel, that you mentioned, the injuries or the potential for injuries, and just the natural conservatism that you have to play World Cup games with, because these are essentially just all-star teams that are getting together that don't play that often. A lot of players are going to have to play either different positions from what they're used to playing, or at least different roles in those positions that are probably, far more defensively minded than what we see at the club level. And I'm really fascinated looking across the list of players that are in this tournament, who adapts best to that sort of a situation. And we got a little bit of a peek at that, I guess, with the Euros, but even that was, was a summer tournament, teams that had a little bit of time to get themselves well-rounded. I'm not sure that necessarily is the case going into this one.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And I think it relates to the squad selection, which whenever a national team releases their squad, you've got half the people saying that's the perfect squad and half the people saying that you've missed out this player who 100% deserves to be on the plane. And I think the US and England are the obvious ones to talk about. England, as you mentioned, Calvin Phillips makes the squad. And yeah, he just hasn't really played many minutes, but he may be fresh. But I think what we're seeing from Gareth Southgate there is he's sticking to the players that he knows and that have played in previous tournaments. And he'd much rather stick to those players who may not be in as good form, but they know his tactical system, and he doesn't want to risk a new player, maybe say Ivan Toney, who we've seen probably did deserve a call up. He's in great form, but doesn't have minutes with the England national team. And with the potential of injuries, fatigue, he's going to have to put players in. And he'd rather put players in who have been around the squad, been on multiple team camps, played in multiple tournaments, know his set very well, that maybe he could put a right back in left back. But that right back has played 50 caps for England already, so he knows their system. And I think you see it as well with the US, and you guys will know the US squad slightly better, but there were some interesting decisions in that as well.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with the U.S. squad, and this is going to be a big question mark, I think, with Greg Berhalter, is it almost seems like he's tried to create a club team atmosphere with this U.S. men's national team. And I think in a normal tournament, this would be a disaster. And there was some real. I don't understand the Zach Steffen thing. Still, I'm still kind of fascinated that that's the direction he went with. Leaving him out of the squad. Not bringing Ricardo Pepi into the roster. That seems odd. It makes sense if you run it through the prism of Berhalter's trying to create an atmosphere around the team or within the team that is more relation-based and more like, okay, who's going to play best with each other under this current system. I just don't know if it's going to work. It probably would not work at a normal World Cup. The one thing he may have going for him is it might work slightly better in this kind of a tournament where you do need some kind of binding agent because you're not going to have even the normal run of friendlies to get guys up and running on things.
100%. I think that every manager, I think, is going to have to rely on players that they can trust, that they've worked with before. I'm going to divert away from the United States and go to Brazil. A big one that I saw as a Liverpool fan myself, Roberto Firmino not getting called up. He's been in great form for Liverpool, a struggling side, but he's scored a lot of goals. And the big team player that they brought up was Richarlison, who has not played nearly as well for Tottenham. And it's the case of how much his club form carry over. But for Tite, the Brazil manager, he just trusts Richarlison. He's played better for Brazil. National team form is a real thing. Being able to play well for your national team, just because you've had a great few months in the start of the season for your club, doesn't mean that should carry over into being a national team selection. So I kind of agree with everything that went down on the United States squad. I don't think there was any major omissions. I think Pepe is a harsh one because he's such a great story, but I don't think that he's done such, groundbreaking things to warrant such a nailed on spot. I think you want a bit more experience, especially because the United States has the youngest team in the entire tournament. You just throw another 18, 19-year-old in there, you're just dragging that age on a little bit more. I think that there's reason for both pessimism and optimism for this United States team. They didn't qualify in 2018. So it's going to be an improvement from that, whatever happens. So I'm looking at it through that prism rather than any sort of optimism where it's like, oh, if we get out of the group, maybe we play the top team from Group A. And I'm not getting into that whole Pandora's box. I'm just looking at maybe we have a decent match or two, not a tournament, a decent match or two.
Yeah. No, I'm with you on that. And I think it's this of all tournaments. I mean, as we just talked about, we mentioned that 2014 group where England and Italy didn't get out of the group stage. And literally nobody predicted that at least one of those teams wouldn't get out of the group stage. Trying to predict who's going to play who coming out of the group stage is almost impossible. But it will be fascinating with the U.S. and England in particular because they should be both collectively better than the other two teams in the group. But it's just at this point, I just don't – we know so little about how these teams are going to look when they get on the pitch. It's hard to really even project as far as beyond the first day of games and how that's going to go. We'll have an answer relatively soon with both of them as far as how they're looking, because if England can't beat Iran and the U.S. can't beat Wales, I think that's going to be a real red flag for both of those squads right away, that all is not right. And that's, I think, like other groups, you're going to see that revealed very quickly. But I think with those two teams in particular, the fact we get to see them so early really will make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think Group B is going to be fascinating. Obviously, we're in the United States. I'm English. That's the group that we're all looking at. England are coming off an absolutely horrific Nations League spell. They looked atrocious, honestly, in the last few games. With that being said, reached the final of the Euros, reached the semi-final of the World Cup in the last two major tournaments. That's a solid resume. That's a solid recent resume. So in theory, one of the top teams to win this. Then you look at the US, that is an incredibly young side. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got Wales, who are being carried by a very old man.
A guy who's not quite my age, but close. And that's not a good thing, let me tell you.
Yeah. And I really do think people are overlooking Wales. And I would love to think that England are going to walk the group, but the US are going to struggle with Wales. I really do think they will struggle with Wales.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to downgrade Wales, but if I'm saying if the US can't beat Wales, that is a very difficult road for them at that point. So we're going to find out really quickly what they're actually made of.
I also personally find it fascinating the order of matches, just based on when those happen. And you have your typical top twos in most groups. Does that happen your first match, your second match, your third match? For the United States and for England, they play in that second match. England will probably destroy Iran. I mean, I would be surprised if anything other than that happens. Then the United States, and I agree, I could see a draw in that very first match. And I think it's going to be a case of Wales then winning their next match. They're on 4 points. And then you have this almost toss-up weird scenario where Wales may be in the best spot to qualify after those first 2 matches, just based on maybe England and the United States poke each other's eyes out and get a draw each. And then it's a case of, oh God, who's going to advance after here? So I think it's the timing of those are very, very weird, because especially if you're a 3 or a 4 team, if you go like a group A, Ecuador and Qatar in that first match, that's 3 points you need to get for both teams. It's hard to see 3 points against Senegal and the Netherlands. And if you don't get a win, I mean, has a team qualified out of the group stage without getting a win ever?
Oh, there have been many, including Italy in '94, who drew all 3 games in the group stage and managed to advance on goal differential. But yes,
then you're forcing yourself to draw all 3 games. But then if you're say Qatar, you draw with Ecuador, then you have to get a draw against Senegal and the Netherlands. That's tough to kind of get that upset against both those teams. So for England and the United States, it's a very simplistic statement. You need to win that first game. It's really hard to imagine an easy path out of that group if you don't have 3 points in that first match, because you're going to have your toughest match immediately following that. You need to put yourself in good footing.
All right, guys, we're not going to go terribly long today, but I wanted to go around and see, who do you think matches up in the final of this World Cup, and who do you think walks away with the 2022 crown? It's complicated and it's tough to make these predictions. We know a little bit about what groups are going to play what groups in the knockout stage and beyond, but there's 1,000 variables that go into how those matchups actually work. But Jack, let me start with you. Knowing what you know and given what you think your predictions are going to be for the groups and beyond, who's matching up in the final and who walks away with the title?
I'm going to be incredibly boring. Incredibly boring. I just think it's destiny, Argentina, Brazil. I think it's just those 2 teams will meet each other at some point. I think they will be on a collision course where only one of them will knock the other one off. I think in my eyes, it's Brazil or Argentina to win it. And so naturally, one of them has to beat the other. If it's a head-to-head final, that would be a match to watch. That would be a fun thing. I would go with Argentina. Argentina is a team that I think is going to win it. I think that they've got a team that they have their guy in Lionel Messi. He's having a great year with PSG. I think he's very glad that he's having this season now rather than if he had just moved to PSG and was having his struggles he was having last year. And they've got a national team which would quite literally die for him. They've got guys that like Emiliano Martinez, especially in goal. I love seeing just how much he is ready to just go into any sort of fight, any sort of battle. They will carry that guy to anything. And if he has a decent World Cup, Lionel Messi does, I think the supporting cast around him will be so good that they will be able to kind of carry themselves to that final. Brazil will be a great test for them. I think that head-to-head would be a really, really tight matchup, but I just think the mixture of talent, timing, and just the raw emotion, I think Argentina is who I'm going with.
All right, Daniel.
I'm going with a slightly different politically heated matchup, and I'm gonna say Portugal and Brazil.
Wow.
That the politics of that go a little bit further back, but I think Portugal are going weirdly slightly under the radar because that team is deep. Um, that squad is very good. You've got some serious firepower up top. Obviously, we don't even have to talk about Ronaldo, but you've got his supporting cast, which is an incredible supporting cast. I think they're gonna kind of gradually sneak through games, and Ronaldo will score in the 93rd minute at least once this tournament to win them, take his shirt off, and do whatever he needs to do. That will happen. As you said, I think Brazil are looking very strong all round. So I think they will make the final. In the two other teams in the semifinals, I think Argentina will make the semifinal and then will fizzle out. And I feel slightly weird saying it, but I do think England will make the semifinal and we will somehow be 3-0 up and lose 4-3 semifinal. And it'll be absolutely brutal for everyone in England.
But Daniel, if you're prepared for that, if you're prepared for a 3-goal bottle.
No, that's why we say it now, but we do it every single time. And then the first game comes and we start playing Football's Coming Home on the radio a bunch, and then the cycle continues. But yeah, no, I do think Brazil are going to win it. I think Brazil will beat Portugal in the final. I just think they are too star-studded all around this year.
We're not too far off. So my semifinals are Argentina versus Brazil, which will probably lead to some kind of war in South America. And then my other semifinal is Portugal versus Denmark. I really like this Danish team. I like what they bring to the table. I think they've got, again, one of the most solid spines of any of the teams in the tournament. And I like their pathway, in that, at least the way that I had it played out. I think they'll probably end up playing England in the quarterfinals. And I think that they might have the antidote for what is a very, very good England squad. That's very much a toss-up game. I will say I love my quarterfinals. It probably won't work out this way, but it's Argentina, Netherlands, Brazil, Spain, England, Denmark, Portugal, Germany. I mean, sign me up for that right now. If that's actually how it plays out, that would be a tremendous set of games to watch. And honestly, I think 7 of those 8 teams could win the World Cup. And it might just come down to a variety of random chance. Like I wouldn't be shocked to see, Germany, Argentina in the final. I mean, that would be a very easy one for me to understand. And honestly, it's like to some degree, this is where if you're in Argentina, you might be like, it might be better to finish second in our group if it's at all possible, because that would get you on the opposite side of the bracket from Brazil. Because do you want to play Brazil in the semifinal? Probably not. You'd rather save that for the final match. And I'd love to see a repeat of the last Copa America final at some point. And I think we are going to get that, because I do think that, Jack, like you said, that's a really, really strong Argentina squad.
Yeah, and I didn't map out, my potentials yet, but I'm looking I'm beginning to throw one together on the Telegraph's one. And so the winner of G plays the second place in H. Yes. Which is Uruguay or Portugal, most likely in that Group H. So Brazil, who I imagine, as we've said, will probably walk Group G. If they get Uruguay, they are a team who I think is going really under the radar. I'm one of my favorite players playing right now is Darwin Nunez, who I think he's in a spot to really be, I think, the story of the tournament, where he gets a handful of goals. He just has a team around him. Federico Valverde is having an unbelievable season at Real Madrid. They got Luis Suarez, who's his last. Yeah,
Rodrigo Bentancur has probably been the best player for Spurs all season. I mean, it's one of those things where they always do this. We talk about this all the time with this Uruguay squad. Like they pull so much out of the talent that they've got, and they have a system that can beat Brazil. They can frustrate Brazil. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I just think that, H and E, and to a lesser extent B, have a second place team that is going to be, you're going to feel very hard done by, that you have to play Spain or Germany in the first knockout round, or Uruguay or Portugal. A team, who would Serbia play in my situation here? They play the winner of H. So they have a tough one, but Serbia, I think, could do something. It depends on what happens in H, obviously, and who they get faced up with. I don't think they beat Portugal. If they get a decent first knockout round team, which kind of seems tough to do based on the hand they've been dealt, they've got a few weapons there. But I just think that that one maybe is the luck of the draw may have, but it made it a little difficult for them in terms of getting too far there. But look, it's I'm excited for that. For if an Uruguay-Brazil round of 16 matchup, that's caught my eye already, with just a very easy scenario to see right happen right there.
And I don't even have Serbia getting out of the group at all. I've got Switzerland finishing second in that group. Switzerland and Japan. Like, if I feel bad, Japan, if they were in any other group, I would just kind of automatically pencil them in for second. They are unfortunately in a group with Spain and Germany, and that's a hard thing to overcome for any squad. But anyway, gents, it's going to be fascinating to watch as we move forward. We've got exactly a week until we're going to be doing this for real at the conclusion of that first game, as Qatar, the hosts, take on Ecuador at 11 a.m. Eastern time. So we'll watch that game, and we will be right here on Pod of the Century, recapping it live. If you want to catch us live, for sure, you can go to the IU Sports Media YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube, search IU Sports Media. We'll be here live, taking questions, giving analysis, talking about that game. And then we'll be back basically every day from that point forward, probably around 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon through the group stage, as we're going to end up with 4 group stage games pretty much every other day from that point until the middle of the following week. That's more soccer than you normally get during the World Cup. So I'm really excited to be able to talk about that many games during the course of the day. So, stick with us throughout the course of the tournament. We should have some good things to say. Jack, Daniel, thanks for joining me here on the preview episode. And I hope you gentlemen have a wonderful week as you get ready for the start of the World Cup.
You as well, Galen. Enjoy
Absolutely.
The week of World Cup Eve.
Yes, I like that. It's the most, not really the most wonderful time of the year. That's next month, but it is a fascinating time in sports. A lot going on in the sports world, and certainly in the soccer world, everything has stopped for the World Cup. So stop with us. We'll watch the games. We'll talk about the games. We'll look forward to talking to you folks soon. For Jack Edwards, for Daniel Eves, I'm Galen Clavier. We'll catch you on the flip side. So long, everybody.